I'm showing the time now is 3:30, and I would like to call the February 2nd, 2023 meeting of the Huntersville Ordinance Advisory Board to order. Let the minutes state that everyone is here with the exception of Ms. Skelly, and hopefully she's going to be here soon. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our January 5th meeting, and there's an amended version. If everybody should have, I think, gotten a hard copy of that. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is the amended version. I'd like to open the floor up for a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes for January 5th.
Do we have a second? Any discussion? All in favor? He just abstained. So, can we do that? All in favor again? One, two, three, four. Motion passes. Do we have anyone, next item on the agenda, public comment? Anyone signed up for public comments? No? Okay. Next item on the agenda is item 4A, and Mr. Finley.
I need to recuse myself from this.
Okay.
Make a motion to excuse Thomas Finley from this discussion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Motion passes. Mr. Finley, we'll bring you back as soon as this discussion is over. Thank you. And I'd like to turn the floor over to staff for their presentation.
All right, it's nice to see you all. I'm going to be presenting TA 2211 signs. The purpose of this text amendment is to increase the flexibility of sign regulations based on customer feedback and to clean up and codify current practices. I'm only going to go through the major changes of the amendments, but let me know if you have questions about the items that are not in the presentation. The most extensive changes are to Article 7.10.1, which has the standards for our permanent on-premise signs. The most notable change to this section is the parking lot sign. Currently, a building wall that does not front a street or urban open space is allowed a wall sign if that area contains a pedestrian entrance and fronts a parking area. When allowed, the maximum area of the parking lot sign is 25% of the allowed square footage for the primary sign, up to 32 square feet. It also requires a square footage transfer, i.e. a deduction of square footage from the primary sign. And so I included this example in your packet. So if y'all have any questions about how to calculate the areas at the end, I'll take those then. Staff is proposing to allow a 32 square foot wall sign on a non-street fronting wall that fronts a parking lot and contains pedestrian entry. This removes the 25% of the area of the primary sign limit and the requirement to transfer the square footage from the primary sign. Staff has gotten many comments over the last 10 years, on how restrictive the 25% size limit and the transfer requirement is. Staff feels comfortable allowing 32 square feet outright, as it is still in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance. (10.7.2) was added to regulate multi-story, multi-tenant buildings. Staff received many inquiries from new tenants in multi-story, multi-tenant buildings about what size sign they can put up. In some cases, the primary wall of the building has already used up the allowed sign area on that primary wall. Tenants often express their frustration that the lease they signed promised space for a wall sign on the primary wall. 10.7.2 was added to make property owners, managers be proactive so that this situation will not happen. If the number of tenant spaces were to change, the sign plan would need to be updated. Staff has also specified each tenant may have a 16 square foot parking lot sign, as previously the entire wall face for the parking lot signage would be limited to 32 square feet, which, if there are multiple tenants, would not be enough for each tenant to have an identifiable sign. Article 10.11.1 and 10.11.2 deal with master sign programs. And we added language under the special sign district to codify the requirement of approval by the town board and the amendment for such approval. We also codified requirements that are already being used for the special sign district master sign plan. And we also updated the sign criteria under the plan development flex option to allow a 40 square foot sign on one non-street fronting wall. Under 10.10.4, we are updating the maximum height of instructional/directional signs to match the minimum height of 5 feet for handicap parking lot signs. Staff has had a few requests for drive-up/curbside signs that are very large in height and size and look more like an advertising sign rather than a directional instructional sign, which an example there is on the screen. The intention is to keep the drive-up pickup signs at a comparable size and height to the handicap parking lot signs to prevent the drive-up pickup signs from overwhelming the parking lot landscape. And so in the graphic, you can see how they have this canopy type structure that has all the numbers on it, 4, 5, 3, 2, 1, and then it has the pickup on top of that. That is what we are trying to avoid with this amendment or this portion of the amendment. And then you see the signs down there that kind of look like your typical handicap signs. Those are more what we are intending, the intention is for. Article 10.10.20, the ordinance does not currently permit sporting event flags, and staff has received feedback multiple times from local sports teams about the desire to have these flags. Signs that flutter are prohibited by our ordinance, so as a compromise, staff is proposing to allow temporary sporting event signs instead of flags. Staff is looking for a recommendation today. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board for staff? Ms. Holman?
When you're talking about flutters, the flags, does that mean also like the church signs that are out on the curbs on Sundays throughout town? Or do they flutter?
The church signs.
The ones that say churches here and they all.
Oh, yeah, they're like the flag type things, the same. Yes. Correct, yes, that is prohibited.
Any additional questions for staff?
Is that the little guy? The little guy that's the blow-up guy that wobbles around like that, is that a flutterer?
The inflatable wacky man, yes.
Is he a flutterer?
Correct, those are prohibited. Those are considered fluttering.
Just a little bit, but they're not allowed on streets or in front of stores. But they're allowed in Veterans Park
And
or a city park?
Typically, if you can see it from the street, they're not allowed.
As long as they're not on the, I guess what I'm asking is, as long as they're not on the street?
If I'm code enforcement, I'm driving down the street and I can see that, it's a distraction to the driver, yeah, we would not allow those things.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Any additional questions? No? 1 minute. Mr. Klutz.
So these flutters, whatever they're being referred to, do they qualify under the day of the event rules? So you put them out on Sunday morning and you take them in on Sunday night, are they exempt?
no, they're prohibited in all instances, whether temporary or permanent.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Whitaker.
Okay, I'm a little concerned now about things being prohibited on private property. I know homeowner associations a lot of times will prohibit certain things. But does the city prohibit flags on private property?
No, so American flags, like regional flags, cultural flags, those are protected under the First Amendment. We do not have standards for those.
Okay, so what were you talking about when you said if you can see it from the road, it's prohibited?
Pick your retail store, let's just say, we'll pick on Thomas since he's not here. Carolina Rapids, they have an event, they put those things out, they're flashing and fluttering, they're drawing attention. Creates a public safety issue with cars passing by. The thing that they want you to do is pay attention to the sign, which now you are now not paying attention to the road. Therefore, the town deems that, along with the engineering department, many, many, many years ago, that those would not be allowed as under the signage ordinance. But what our compromise is, we can have a standard set, in the ground banner if you're gonna have a soccer tournament on Saturday or Sunday, Thursday nights, those types of things. They can put up day of the event.
Okay, so we're not allowing the signs that would distract the drivers, but the purpose of signs is to distract the driver, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose of a sign.
Kind of a catch-22, isn't it? We prefer, I would, a little different perspective, the signs are there to identify the event, not to attract attention. I'm not gonna be driving by and feel like playing in a soccer tournament. I'm going to a soccer tournament because I'm in town, spending my tourism dollars, staying at your hotels, spending money at your restaurants. It's an identification. Here is where the event is going to be.
Okay, I go with that. I'm just
Sure.
a little concerned about your statement that you can see it from the road, it's illegal.
All right,
Mr. Gannon.
I thought I understood this. I want to make sure that I'm clear on something else. What about the electronic light signs?
We prohibit flashing signs as well.
Well, I don't mean that they flash, but they flash when they change.
You can have you can't have billboards, you can have electronic, like monument signs. That's allowed as long as they don't flash.
Okay. Because the only sign that ever bothers me is, and we have no control of that, is on the interstate when one of those lights change, it makes me turn my head like that.
Oh, if it's on the interstate, then.
I know that doesn't
yeah.
apply to, I understand.
Ms. Jones?
So the flutter signs, is that ordinance in effect now? Or is this? So why do we see them everywhere?
Unfortunately, our code enforcement team is rather small, and we work off a complaint basis. So until we would have a larger staff to be more proactive about those types of things, it's primarily complaint basis, or if they happen to notice when they're out and about driving by.
I don't want this to get too ridiculous, but what about the guy twirling the sign on the side of the road to
thing,
get
not
your
allowed.
taxes?
Not allowed.
Okay.
So, yes, if our code enforcement folks are out and they notice them, they have a friendly reminder for the new owners of businesses or new shops that aren't familiar with the ordinance. They educate them, give them a couple days, get things cleared out, switch out their signs, those types of things. As always, we're not here to fine people right away. We're here to just educate and ask for compliance, and we've had great success. But yeah, do our code enforcement people work at night or on the weekends? Occasionally they'll work on a Saturday, but not on Sundays. So there are times that folks put these things up and put them down. We'll get a call on Monday morning, we'll go out and investigate, it's already remedied. So if there are people who keep doing that, we'll try to contact them through different business channels, say, hey, by the way, we've been told you're putting these things out on the weekends. Friendly reminder, here's what the rules are, and typically we get compliance.
Any additional questions for staff? Okay, well, I would like to open the floor up for, someone would like to make a motion for a recommendation for TA 22-11.
I'd like to make a motion to approve TA 22-11 to amend Article 10, signs to increase flexibility of sign regulations and codify current practices.
Do we have a second? Second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Motion passes. Oh, I'm sorry, opposed?
I'm
You're abstaining? Okay. All right. You're abstaining? Okay. Okay, so motion passes. We need to make a motion to bring Mr. Finley back.
I'd like to make a motion to bring back Thomas Finley.
All in favor? Motion passes. And after he is come back, we'll move on to item 4B. Welcome back, Mr. Finley. Thank you. We are moving on to item 4B. Let's do TA 22-15.
All right, I will be presenting TA 2215. And I just want to start out with, since the HOAB agenda went out, staff has consulted with legal and is redrafting the proposed amendment. We didn't necessarily want to pull the item off the agenda with such short notice. The proposed amendment is to increase the fines for disturbance and removal of required vegetation. This was prompted by a citizen asking the town to compare the dollar amount of our monetary penalties for disturbance removal of required vegetation to other nearby communities, as they felt ours seemed low in comparison. The current penalty is $2 per square foot and was imposed in 2003 and has not been increased since then. So based on the research that we have conducted, staff recommends increasing the dollar per square foot from $2 to $5 to keep up with inflation and other communities. Again, staff is redrafting the language to simplify the penalties and will not include a penalty for specimen heritage trees as proposed in the current draft. Staff is not looking for a recommendation or very extensive discussion on this item today. We just wanted to update you on the status. Thank you.
Okay, so you're not looking for us to really discuss this, just more of a,
Right, just an update because the language is going to change pretty drastically.
okay. Are there any questions from board members related to this before we move on to the next agenda item? Ms. Jones?
Okay, so you said it will not include a penalty for specimen or heritage trees.
Correct. Yes, how this is written right now, it will not include that extra penalty for based on the caliper inch for specimen and heritage trees.
But the revision will include a penalty?
No.
And why wouldn't there be a penalty? I'm just
So-
curious.
There is still the penalty. We'll still have the $2 going to $5, but we're going to not propose the specimen and heritage tree penalty.
Hang on, that's not quite here. We gotta draw. Let me draw attention to the large paragraph in the bottom right. You can be fined up to 4 times for for removing the same tree. We're gonna reduce that down to 2 times. So the way it's written is not how we're gonna propose it. You have to be careful how many times you dip into the pool. 4 times is a little too much, so we're gonna revise that so it's down to twice, okay? And we're debating how the best write that language, all right?
I was just concerned, we don't have any heritage trees, but,
We found one.
well, Frank and I are trying to work on one. I hope we're not working on the same one, because it'd be wonderful to have 2 now.
This one's down off of Mount Holly Huntersville Road.
This one's right across the street at Doc Craven's old house.
Too.
So we're going to have 2. There you go, Frank. Yeah, that was my concern about the heritage trees.
We'll make sure there's something in there and it's appropriate.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Okay, well, let's, with no questions, we will move on to item 4C.
Good afternoon, everyone. So here for text amendment 23-01 regarding street tree regulations. And it is on the agenda for a recommendation, but we do understand if extensive conversation is needed for this, so just want to say that in advance. So just a little background here. So we have, the town has had requirements for street trees for decades now. And we do see the value in them, that they enhance the community, but we also recognize that there are costs associated with the maintenance of the trees and maintenance of our public right-of-way. So one possible alternative to mitigate for some of the challenges that come along with maintaining our trees is to keep our current regulations and simply increase the funding for sidewalk maintenance. Currently, about $500,000 is spent on sidewalk maintenance yearly. Now, while all of that money is not spent on repairs specifically for street trees, the overwhelming majority of that money is spent for repairs caused by the damage from street trees. Another alternative is to change our design parameters to better support having street trees, and that's what we're going to talk about a bit today. So one of the considerations is the space for the street tree, the location of the sidewalk, and the type of tree that is chosen to go in the planting strips. A little bit of history about the street tree regulations. So before 1996, we had developments like North Stone that had a planting strip on one side of the street. It did not include a street tree, and it was a very narrow area with that green zone. We moved to 1996 up to 2003, where we have a typical of a 5-foot planting area that includes a street tree, and that's a development that you would see like Monteith Park, for example, where they have street trees planted in that area. Then in 2003, there was a recognition that that 5 feet was a bit narrow, and that was increased to 7 feet. So there's a development here where you see the trees are not yet mature, but they have the 7-foot planting strip area there. Now today, the conversation is about what we want the community to be moving forward. What do we envision for Huntersville in the future? One of the things that we considered, as mentioned, are the type of trees that are used. So when we're planting near sidewalks, some trees are more compatible with that sidewalk infrastructure than others. And one of the things we did was evaluate our tree and shrub list to determine whether or not we were recommending the appropriate types of trees to be planted in that planting strip. An example of the 5-foot planting strip, as mentioned, is in the Monteith Park development. And there are 2 sections where we looked at in Monteith Park. One where you can see where those red maples are, and then there's an area to my left, I believe it would be on your left on the screen as well, where there are smaller to medium-sized trees planted. We would not be recommending to maintain large maturing trees like those maples, because that would be inappropriate for a 5-foot planting strip area. And one of the considerations that we have is that our proposed text amendment is for developments moving forward, but we also have to consider what we're going to do about the developments that are reaching maturity, that have large maturing trees in those planting strips. When the trees are dead, diseased, or dying, we don't want them replaced with large maturing trees again, because it would essentially just extend the damage that's being caused and the money that's being spent on the infrastructure. So this is the example of where you have those large maple trees in Monteith Park, and this we would not consider to be appropriate moving forward, to have large maturing trees in this tight of a space. Another example would be Centennial here. While we do recognize like the beauty and the grandeur of the trees here, that 5-foot planting strip area is also quite narrow. Another example would be Skybrook. It's fantastic trees, but it's also very narrow, and they're reaching their maturity at this point with the Skybrook development. Now we move further in time here in terms of when the developments were approved, We have Asbury Park that has the 7-foot planting strip. Now, these trees are younger, obviously. They have not yet reached maturity, but the 7-foot planting strip does allow for more space for those trees to grow. And another example would be the Bellington development as well that was approved with the 7-foot wide planting strip. Vermillion was approved with the 7-foot wide planting strip. It's my understanding is that that was a choice to go with the 7-foot width at that time, but the development is reaching, it's getting closer to maturity with those trees in the Vermillion development. Tanner's Creek is an example of an 8-foot wide planting strip, and in our review of the data that was provided by the Public Works Department, Tanner's Creek actually had a lot of sidewalk repair, and one of the reasons that we believe is because of the large maturing trees that were planted. So while that planting strip was 8 feet, they planted a large maturing tree, so it was not, there's not enough space essentially for that root system to spread.
Just to clarify, this was one of those trees that's not recommended for a street tree or red maple because the roots are at the surface level. And so exactly what Lauren's saying is it's 8 feet, it's extra wide, but it was the wrong tree in that location. So,
Correct.
you know, we would.
So one of the alternatives that was proposed by Engineering and Public Works was to change the design parameters. This was one alternative. There are multiple, so just stick with me. This alternative would reduce the current requirement of 7 foot of the planting strip area to 5 feet, and then move the street tree from the planting strip into the private yard. So this is our current requirement. It's a 7-foot green zone, and then one of the alternatives was to have that, and it reduces that right-of-way but moves the tree onto the private property. So one of the things to consider with this type of arrangement is that on the image on the right is Huntersville, the image on the left is not, is that the town already has a yard tree requirement. So when new developments are approved based on the size of the lots that are proposed by the developer, we have a chart of how many yard trees you should add to that property. The smallest lots would have 1 front yard tree and 1 rear yard tree. So one of the challenges with with just reducing that right of way and moving the tree to the yard is that we would have to consider, are you now adding an additional yard tree to that front yard? Or is the street tree replacing the existing yard tree in those cases? And then we also see, that the barrier that is provided there with the street trees in the planting strip versus the alternative where, we can say obviously our, perspective on the aesthetic is subjective, but how that looks on the left versus the right. So another part of our research was looking at other communities in North Carolina. So we looked at the largest communities in North Carolina, and Huntersville is in that list. And there are several considerations that we came to understand, essentially. One is the terminology differences. So one of the reasons why we're not, we didn't include the chart showing all the different communities and all the different terms is because some of the communities use the term, say, street tree. Some of them use yard tree, some of them use planting yard, some of them use green zone. And so what we essentially did was we actually relied on the engineering typicals, which was very wonderful that most communities just have those diagrams available, and looked to see, based on the way that the Huntersville right-of-way is set up, we have our, the road where someone drives. Then we have the planting yard, which has the green zone where the street trees go. We have the sidewalk, and in residential subdivisions, we have the yard. So we did a comparison based on the other communities in North Carolina to see what terms they were using for those and where they were requiring the trees to go in those cases. What we found was a great variation by use by zoning district. So depending upon the use that's proposed for those properties, you may or may not have a street tree requirement. And the zoning district was also a determining factor as to whether or not you would have a street tree. But overall, we did find that regardless of what it's called, there was a street tree requirement for more than half of the largest communities, including Huntersville. So what we have in the proposed text amendment today, as it is written, are options, which is something that we saw that the city of Charlotte provides, and ours was based more on our staff's collaboration, because we realized we are not Charlotte, but that is a neighboring community that has a similar requirement that we're proposing. So the option would be, our current requirement is that you have a 7-foot planting strip. And we're saying that if you opt to not put your street trees in that planting strip, then it would go into the yard. Or you can provide a 9-foot planting strip and then plant the tree there. That would give the tree more space to mature, and you would be provided with a healthier tree and mitigate some of the impacts on the public right-of-way infrastructure. Another option is to provide 2 choices for someone, like for the developer, when they're proposing the types of tree. So allow them to have the option to provide the 9-foot green zone where they could plant the large tree, or a 7-foot green zone where they can plant a small tree that would be more appropriate and in that space. This is the language that I just discussed. The second element to the text amendment, you see the bolded area at the bottom. This is what the first option is getting at. So what we've seen a lot and why we have constant, I guess, considerations about removing the tree from the planting strip and putting it into the yard is that in many cases, the home product that is chosen to go on the properties uses a considerable amount of the lot area, such that the front yard does not always have enough room to accommodate a tree. Now, one of the zoning districts that we have, the neighborhood residential zoning district, does not have a lot size minimum. So if your lot is less than 50 feet wide, you have your alley access, it is the prerogative of the home builder to put whatever product there that they choose. And in that case, they may not have enough space to accommodate the tree. So one of the elements of this text amendment is to say that when you have a setback or build-to range that is 20 feet or less, that you will be allowed to have a small maturing yard tree rather than a large maturing tree in that area. And that is it. I know that's a lot. Any questions?
Did you have a question? Yes.
I've got a couple,
Sure.
and I'm coming from a background of being a public works director. So I'm not a big fan of trees and new roads and sidewalks.
Understood.
Public works people aren't. But if we move the trees onto the property owner's property, who's responsible for the tree?
The property owner would be responsible for the tree.
Who has to replace the tree if it blows down?
The property owner. Now,
Who has to fix the sidewalk if the roots push up the sidewalk?
the town. Now,
Well,
let me add this clarification. The way that the ordinance is currently written, it is either the homeowners association or the property owner that is responsible for the tree. So in every case, it is not the property owner. The HOAs can take it upon themselves to include that in their yearly maintenance fees to just take care of all of the trees in the neighborhood. In some cases, that does not happen. It is left to the property owner to maintain their street trees and yard trees.
Okay. Second question. If we require a developer to plant a tree, a large tree, in each, on each property, can the homeowner then remove that tree?
The homeowner can definitely remove the tree, however, it is still a requirement for that yard to have a tree.
But then he can put any kind of tree he wants to in, or he has to put a large maturing tree back, for instance? I think we need to have those questions answered before we,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, there is an answer. So technically, yes, ideally, you wouldn't want the property owner to just rip out those trees. Now, I'm not an arborist, but I was informed that it's usually not the healthiest to replace a tree in the same spot. That said, yes, they could replace, because ultimately, if a tree dies, they still have the yard tree requirement, and they would be expected to replace the tree. And they would replace it with either the same species or a similar species that meets the ordinance requirement.
Can we replace a tree with a tree that flutters?
I'll answer that.
No,
No?
no.
Okay.
So just so to give some history, I came here in 2001, and when I came here, there was already a tree committee established and operated for probably 8, 9 months before I even got here. And in '02, early '02, the town put a moratorium on development and rewrote the whole zoning codes and water quality codes and all that. And the tree committee finalized their recommendations such that in 2003, the whole code got updated. That's the tree committee. When I came in the door in '02, there was a tremendous outcry about trees are getting torn down. You probably still hear it today. I'm pretty sure you hear that. I'm pretty sure you don't hear, we got too many trees, let's get rid of them. And that was the case back in '01 and '02 and '03. So it was that tree committee that said, you know what, we got to get more trees in our community. And so that's the committee that recommended requiring the yard trees. So the street trees were already required, as Lauren said. Street trees were required back when the town created the zoning code in 1996. The only difference was in '03 when we required the yard trees as recommended by the tree committee. We also expanded the planting strip from 5 foot wide to 7 foot wide because we matched what Charlotte was doing. Charlotte said, street trees, you need at least 7 feet. So we matched that. So in answering your question, because the town adopted a code and says you will have a yard tree, the answer would be yes, you got to replace them. If we find out about it, you have to replace them, right? So that is not an easy thing to keep up with, but it is something that, yes, we could do. I don't know that we've ever had a situation where a yard tree was taken down. Can you recall one? Okay, we've had a few. Okay, we've had a few where yard trees that were required were taken down, they needed to replace them. So I hope that answers your question is, yes, if somebody puts a yard tree in there, yes, they got to replace them if it's a required yard tree. Where our concern is if you require that yard tree and then you replace the street tree over into the yard, now you have 2 yard trees, that starts to get tight. We already have a problem, as Lauren said, that if the houses are up close to the street, and you saw a picture of Monteith Park, you can't even get a yard tree in there. Because it's a 10-foot setback, and then you can have porches that project out. You'd have to, put a tree that's maybe, got this kind of span on it. So that's been one of the concerns, but believe me, the engineering and public works department has spent a considerable amount of effort, time, and money fixing these sidewalks. Mm-hmm. And it's not just to fix the sidewalk so you don't fall, it's to meet handicap codes. I mean, it is an issue that the Board of Commissioners are saying, get a solution, we need the solution. And we are throwing out a couple of options that are out there. But certainly, one of the things we've been doing for the last year or so is making sure you put the right tree in the right location. Don't put the red maple. pretty. They are gorgeous as you drive down the street. I mean, I admit, you saw a picture of Monteith from up above. It's, oh, that's pretty. But it's the wrong tree, especially when you're in a 5-foot area. It doesn't even work in a 7-foot area. It's so you got to be smart about this thing. And this is all about kind of turning the ship around and trying to be more proactive and making sure that there's not this liability that keeps growing exponentially every year.
Well, I don't want you to interpret what I said that I'm against this. I'm not. But I do think we need to be very specific, whatever option we choose. If it's going to put a financial burden on the homeowner, that needs to be somehow, like when it's an HOA, there's an HOA agreement. You should understand that when you buy in that neighborhood that you can't remove a tree. You need to clearly understand that in closing. The attorneys need to make sure that's written in the deeds and all that kind of stuff. We just need to cover all that.
Yeah.
The one comment that struck me as being, and Lauren, was one of the options was to simply increase the funding. I don't think you can simply increase funding for anything, so I don't think that's a good option at all. But you're right, it's a huge cost to the city, I'm sure.
It's
was to me.
$500,000 a year, but again, that's not all just street trees, but that's sidewalks in general, but nonetheless, it is, but, you know, there are tremendous benefits for the street trees. So there, you know, I mean, so, you know, we're not getting into all what's the negatives and the positives about it. There are positives. That's why we're having this discussion, which how do we do it better? That's the point. I will say from your standpoint, the homeowner cost. So in my homeowner documents, it says I'm responsible for the street tree. The HOA isn't. Okay. So I had issues and I paid for a company to fix some of those for me, and they did, you know. So, I mean, it's an added cost to me, but I bought into it. I knew I was responsible for it. So, but I happen to be one of those 5-foot strips. So if the tree dies, you know, what Brian and Lauren are saying is, you know, if I have to replace it, I'm not replacing it with the maple, or in my case, a pin oak, which is, again, what tree you shouldn't put in there. Don't put a pin oak in there, but that's what I got. You know, put a smaller tree in there, and so.
Ms. Jones?
Yeah, Harrison had my question there. I've never lived in an HOA, so I don't know how they work, but I would assume that, like you said, that an HOA would either cover that expense of the maintenance of the tree, or you would know ahead of time when you bought that you were going to be responsible. But what about older existing neighborhoods where you come in and you widen the roads and you put in sidewalks and then you put your tree in the property owner's yard, which is fine. I wouldn't mind that, but then I'm taking on that expense of maintaining that tree, of trimming that tree, and if it dies, replacing that tree.
Okay, let me make sure I'm understanding the scenario that you're referring to. Like an established neighborhood where right-of-way is taken from a lot and they already had a street tree or a yard tree requirement?
Say if you go into an existing neighborhood now and you're going to widen the street, add curb, gutter, and sidewalk.
Okay, so one that doesn't have, okay.
Right. So are you going to, you'll put a yard tree in the property owners unless you do a planting strip.
So if there is a neighborhood that doesn't already have curb and gutter is being added to that neighborhood, I'm fairly certain, like moving forward now, we would definitely have a serious discussion about what would be appropriate to plant in that situation if they did. But those neighborhoods would have they would have had a street and yard tree requirement, or they wouldn't have done.
They wouldn't have.
Yeah, so we wouldn't go in and say, well, now you have to have a yard tree necessarily.
So they would be grandfathered.
So they would be vested under the plan that they were approved under. There wouldn't be a new requirement.
I mean, our road is torn up because of the root systems from the trees. My car, which is actually a Pathfinder that sits high, got stuck on a hump in the road that was caused by a big oak tree that is no longer there, but the road is still this high of a hump. And it was not on the edge of the road. The tree was not. I mean, it did that much damage from probably 10 foot off the road. So,
So just so everybody knows, Kathy does not live in a newer subdivision where the tree was planted within the last 70
right,
years.
this was probably
So this was,
75 or 100 years old.
right, this is just wanted to be
was
sure
just
we're
using
clear
that
on
as an
that, but you're,
excuse to
yeah.
the damage
So
that
you're
the
you're
tree
raising a good,
caused.
a retrofit. The town comes in, it's not curb and gutter, it's just, and then they come in and put sidewalks, and then would they put the street trees in? That, they might not, might not put street trees in the retrofit. Sometimes when, especially when the land is really tight, there are times where we don't even put a grass strip in there because the houses are so close together. If we tried to put a regular street in, we'd be in people's windows with the sidewalk.
But it could be an option to add a yard tree, right?
We would not do that. We would not add a yard tree to so the town would not do a yard tree. That it might be, if there's enough room, there might be enough room to have a wider planting strip. Today it's 7 feet, right? Minimum 7 feet. And the town might maybe use tree fund money to put street trees in as a retrofit, if the community wanted it. If the community wanted it.
If the community wanted it, I mean,
But a lot of these retrofits are going to be places that are really tight. And so in those particular instances, we're not even going with the 7-foot planting strip. The most recent ones, we just had to simply put the sidewalk back to the curb because we
Gibson
could
Park.
not take people's, minimize the impact to the neighbors. So the retrofits are a little bit more difficult, if you will. So I hope that gives some clarity on that.
right, so when you say going forward, you mean new construction?
Yes, exactly. Brand-new subdivisions going forward, we're going to make sure it's the right tree in that 7-foot planting strip. But now maybe we should go with just a small tree in that planting strip and then go 9 feet for if you want something larger. And then, as engineering said, well, maybe you could even do a 5-foot and put the tree on the private property, sort of like the yard trees already required. So these are the things that are.
Ms. Allman?
As Maya Angelou said, when you know better, do better. I'm good with everything being, from here on, making these decisions going forward. But I've been here long enough to remember that, living on Gilead Road, when the town decided it was a great idea to plant Bradford pear trees, 2 in every yard all the way down Gilead. And the homeowners had a responsibility with that because we didn't have HOAs on Gilead Road. So just keeping those things in mind. I got curious, and you may not be able to answer this, but what does Raleigh do and Charleston do? Do they go to their budget meetings every year and complain about trees in the street too? Because they have the most glorious trees and the sidewalks are all beat up and they are places that you go to on purpose. I mean, they're tourist attractions, so.
How the funding works for their street tree maintenance, I am not sure, but I do know Durham, if I'm not mistaken, they consider themselves the city of Oaks or city of Raleigh or Durham, and they have protections for them. So this is a leap, a presumption, based on what we've read about the city of Charlotte. Certain trees are, for larger municipalities, depending on where they're located, may be maintained by that municipality. That is not every street tree. It's definitely not the ones in private neighborhoods. But I can look into that, how they manage to, because it has to be funded. Like any municipality that has a street tree requirement, either it's the responsibility of that adjacent property owner, someone else, or that municipality. So I'm happy to check that.
I'll just say it is unrealistic to think there's not repair in everybody's budget. And so I think one of the first slide Lauren showed is what do you want your community to be? And so from a planning standpoint, we think the street trees make a lot of sense. It's got to be the right tree in the right location, but we think it adds a lot to the community. But there's a budgetary cost. If we kept going down, well, we changed the code in '03. We changed and we went to 7 feet, but we're still getting some of these wrong trees in that 7 foot. We got to fix that, and maybe we got to get a wider green space to get healthy location for the trees and all the utilities that come with it.
Okay, Mr. Munger.
Thank you. As Jack knows, this one's kind of the bane of my existence. The idea that we're spending $500,000 to fix sidewalks because the wrong tree was planted there drives me crazy. It's quite complex. As you can tell, Jack has mentioned that we've tried to revise this several times, and part of the issue is, when I look at it, initially I said, well, why don't we just put the sidewalk right next to the road? There's a problem with that in terms of perception. People don't feel it's as safe. And the secondary issue is people start parking on those sidewalks. So why don't we move the sidewalk further in? Now you have an issue with the house being up there and people parking in their driveway and now blocking the sidewalk. Happens in my neighborhood. That drives me nuts too. So really what I think they're trying to do, and it makes the most sense, is it has to be the right tree. It's not where that sidewalk is placed. It has to be the right tree. We can't have trees with those ground roots, or if I'm using the wrong terminology, my apology, but the roots that grow right at that level and buckle the sidewalk. Because, I mean, I live in Vermillion, we have the 7-foot gap, got buckled sidewalks all over the place. So this may not be ultimately the right answer, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction, and we will revisit, we'll continue to refine it and get better over time. But just keep in mind, there's a lot of thought process about it, because, like I said, it drives me insane, and I want the right answer, and I know the right answer is not to say no trees whatsoever. And also, and just from my perspective, Vermillion, we do have the tree between the sidewalk and the street. I am responsible to replace that if it dies. And I have to go through my HOA to say what tree can I plant. And unfortunately, in Vermillion, I can plant a pin oak, which is not the right tree. But that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Gammon.
Thank you. Lauren, can you go back to the first slide with, that showed a list of trees? I think it was the first one, might have been the second one. Nice slides. Oh, there you go. I just want to point out something. I don't remember the exact wording, but Bradford pear, it says should not be planted near sidewalks. My understanding in the state of North Carolina, you can't purchase those and you can't plant those anymore.
Right, so here, just so you know, we have reams of information that we gathered, that was just in a snippet of what we should be doing. And I just put it in there because it had a link to it, so people can look at it. Bradford pears are the, you know.
It's an invasive species.
Yeah, other than Amy appreciates Bradford pear. No, Bradford pears, you just don't plant those things anywhere. Hopefully you can't buy them. But so just bear in mind, that's not what we're saying needs to be, planted. It's just, but a lot of these trees are appropriate for our area, and we should be looking for them to be planted in a wider strip than what we got today, because some of these are pretty big. Some of them are small, like the dogwood tree is a smaller tree, right? So that could possibly work in a 7-foot area, but we're still kicking that around. But
so the only reason I mentioned that, Jack, was that it was listed here, so other people see it, and that what Amy mentioned about Gilead Road. And I would just, I didn't sit here and go back and look at the Huntersville approved tree and shrub list, but if Bradford pears are still listed in there, I would recommend that. Okay, that's good. All right, then the next part, the other piece I wanted to ask was, going to smaller trees in those planting zones regardless is a step in the right direction. And just, go back to the side where you said you put 1 tree in the front and 2 in the back, what the zoning ordinance currently says? The requirements, the current requirements? Yeah, so example, just for perspective, because I always have to do the math. I had it written down somewhere, but 10,890 square feet is a quarter mile. Most of the subdivision lots that we have around here are around a quarter acre. So that means they would be required by this ordinance to have 1 tree in the front or 2 in the rear, unless they already had existing trees, correct? Yeah, two in the rear, unless they have existing trees
Yes, that's correct.
in the subdivisions. You know, and just for perspective, for another subdivision, my subdivision, I've seen nowhere where it says I'm required to have a number of trees. But then again, I've cut down 7 over 28 years, and I have 20-plus in my yard. And you have to get permission from the HOA to cut a tree down. The ones I cut down were either diseased or becoming a danger to my home. So just to point that out, perspective of size. And the only thing the other thing I would add is some of this even has to go back to the other part about the other one that's being rewritten, the other one on text amendment, is that residents don't know this. It's, you know, this is, the trees thing, it's all about education. I know enforcement's there too, but education and enforcement. So the only thing I see in here at this point, of the point to where we are right now, I don't want to add more tree requirements and regulation requiring residents to have more trees in their yard. I don't want to put it on the resident, because then we're regulated. We've already done this, I can't do anything about that, but I just feel strongly that we shouldn't add more to it. Thank you very much, that's all.
Mr. Whitaker.
I left off one of my notes when I talked. I would encourage the staff, as you continue this, and I applaud you for doing it because it definitely needs to be done. There's one additional thing you have to think about, particularly when you start talking about the trees that are deep-rooted instead of the shallow roots. Sewer problems. If you moved a tree up into the homeowner's property and that line fills up with sewer, with roots, that's on the homeowner now. Currently, typically, if it's on the street side of the clean-out, which is usually somewhere around the right-of-way line, then the Charlotte Water will take care of it. But you could be causing a serious cost on the homeowner if you allow deep-rooted trees to be planted over the top of sewer laterals. That may be something you need to look at on front rear, depending on which way the sewer flows, but, you know, there should be
Yes,
some,
and
just consider that.
Yes, and we definitely appreciate that comment. That is one of the things that we consider with regard to the smaller home lots that we see more often today than in some of the more mature neighborhoods where the lots were third of an acre or more in most cases, where you have an adequate sized front yard to accommodate a tree or multiple trees. But in the smaller lots, typically alley-fed lots, townhome properties, those types of things, you don't have that space. So we can definitely look at that. Another thing is that there's always the option to consider assigning responsibility, wherein right now there is an option that is given to developers as to whether or not the HOA or the property owner is allowed to maintain those trees. Where it could be, it is the homeowners association in each case that is responsible for that, in addition to the other things that they're responsible for in the neighborhood. It's just an idea.
Who's responsible for assigning responsibility?
That would be the developer.
Ms. Alman.
Sorry, it might be a simple question. The supplemental landscaping provisions for residential lot trees, it's not underlined in there anywhere. This is in the ordinance already, right? Okay, so we're not putting anything on the resident, this is there.
Yes, if I'm understanding correctly, I think that it is adding a tree that is the concern, is that there seems to be a preference not to add more for the homeowner to maintain, in addition to what is currently required.
Talking about the green zones and the planting strip increases. Okay, and then perhaps the change for the setback for the 20-foot front yards. Okay, that's what.
Yeah, that was my comment, Amy. I didn't want to, I know this is already in the ordinance, but I didn't want to add to it.
Okay,
That's the only comment. I like the concept of a 9-foot green strip. I wish they would, it had been that way all along, but they're not, and they weren't.
Is there any requirement in the ordinance that specifies the way the tree has to be planted?
Yes, there is a typical for the planting installation in the engineering, I believe it's engineering standards manual, yes.
Is it digging a hole, or is it trenching, or?
So, I'm not gonna remember off the top of my head, but okay.
It's my understanding there's a big benefit one to the other when it comes to street trees.
Yeah, there is a typical, and it is very clear, but defer to Stephen to explain.
Yeah, there are standards how that is, and it's the execution. It's safe to say that we cannot go out and inspect every single tree that's planted in this town. We do not have the staff. We go out and at the end, and you're looking at the situation. I can tell you right now, I've experienced it myself. It was not planted in accordance to our standards, but they're on the plans. Someone signs it, someone stamps it. It's the execution out in the field. So if we want to start looking at tree inspections, then we're looking at adding staff. But the commissioners, you know, they have a tall task this year, sure.
Okay, so it's not just dig a hole, drop the tree in, it's something more than that. Okay.
Have an opportunity. I was hoping to get an opportunity. Didn't know how that worked over here now. Have a few things to think about, too. You talked about, say, Jack's laid out several options. There's more than just trees in the planting strip, too. Sewer was one of the things that cross. Water lines typically are in this same area. Telecommunications are also power, gas. These are other utilities that are also in this same area. So keep those in mind as you think about the options out there. And there's also, say, the three options presented, there's different right-of-way impacts. So depending on the size of the property or what the developer, I don't know if it's going to be the developer's choice or not. Maybe that's part of the discussion. If it's developer's choice, do they choose to go narrow? Do they want a community that has wider planting strips? Sounds like communities chose to go wider previously when they didn't have to. So that all works into it too. Another thing that is publicly maintained in the planting strips is the stormwater infrastructure. The trees can have an impact on that as well, in addition to all the other utilities previously mentioned. Something else in the planting strip, signs. So street signs, stop signs, your regulatory signs, your street name signs. These are other things that are in this same area that sometimes can conflict with trees. Street lights. It's another one to think about. The more dense or less area the trees have when they grow, well, it's going to cover up the street lights as well, depending on how much room is there. And then the last couple things are sight distance. We try now to keep them away from intersections. Some of the older communities, before we were looking at plans, had trees right up in the intersections. Those can create sight distance issues for vehicles and pedestrians trying to cross the street. So these are just some of the many factors that go into thinking about trees, where they're located, the size of trees, the number of trees, the spacing of trees, a lot of different factors that go in. Try to figure out where they best should go. You can answer questions if you have more along those lines.
Any additional questions? No? And staff is looking for a recommendation today?
Pardon?
You're looking for a recommendation today?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, so this is more of a discussion, and we're going to see this again. Okay.
Yes, we have several items, I think, to follow up on, so.
Okay, all right. So if the rest of the board does not have any further questions, we can move on to item 4D. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this text amendment 23-02 is made up of 3 sections, and they are unrelated for the most part. So just to start off, so I'll take them piece by piece as we go through. So section 1 is the proposed removal of a reference, a TIA reference for sketch plans. This is not a proposal to change TIA requirements in any way, shape, or form. It is a reference that is being proposed to be removed. Sections 2 and 3 are regarding the withdrawal of applications for amendments, and section 4 is regarding the mailing requirements for sketch plan applications. So section 1, I'm gonna just kind of drop down to the sentence where the reference is. Where it says, the draft TIA shall be submitted to town staff 30 days prior to the town board public hearing, or as provided in the subdivision ordinance. So last year, there was a text amendment that moved sketch plan approvals from quasi-judicial approval to administrative approval. And there is just no longer a reference for this in the subdivision ordinance. So this requirement for the draft TIA to be submitted to the town is only applicable to rezoning cases anymore, because those are quasi-judicial decisions. Sorry, thank you for the correction. Legislative, but they go to the town board for final action. And then the further clarification is for the submissions that are not rezoning cases, that they would follow the requirements of the town TIA process and procedures manual. So that is it. This one. Any questions on this section? Nope, we're not making any changes to the requirements, not proposing any changes.
Let me ask a question, just reading it, the wording. That sentence, the draft TIA shall be submitted to the town staff 30 days prior to the town board hearing. Then in parentheses, you have for rezoning cases.
That is proposed to be removed. It might not be showing up.
So it should be a line on that also.
it's a
Gotcha.
line.
I'm good.
Any additional questions on that aspect?
Okay, section 2. So these are proposed amendments to Articles 11.4.4 and 11.8 of the zoning ordinance. So several changes are proposed here. In totality, these changes are to provide flexibility for an applicant to withdraw a petition for an amendment at any point before final action. So this would be a text amendment or an amendment to the zoning map, which is a rezoning. So currently, the requirement is that the petition may be withdrawn by the petitioner at any time up to the date of the public hearing on the petition. The proposed change is that this would allow the applicant to withdraw the petition prior to final action by the town board, and then the subsequent changes are relevant to that. Yes.
So just to be clear, to make sure I know the timeline, so you can go to public hearing, you could go to the planning board, but the day it goes to the town board for approval, they could withdraw.
At any point, yes, before final action.
Any time before the meeting started. They could do it that day, or they have to do it before the day of. Because what I'm reading, it says prior to final action by the town board.
So yes, so presumably at any point before the town board makes final action on that case.
Okay. I'm just trying to be clear. So they could be discussing it and they decide to withdraw it.
That's the
Okay.
way it's written.
That's what I want to be clear.
Anything else?
I think the one that was sent to us, there was another section to
Yep,
this.
there is.
Okay, and we're talking, I guess you're talking about that next, okay.
Okay,
If there's no further questions from anybody on the board.
okay. So, it's minor in scale, but it's large implications. So, 11.8, so two kind of aims here. So for any petition for the reclassification of property, which is a rezoning, that has been withdrawn, denied in whole or in part, or approved to a classification other than the one originally requested, shall not be resubmitted within 1 year of the date of the town board's action on the original petition, unless a petitioner applies for a district which is lower in the hierarchy of zoning districts in section 3.1.1, which is our section on zoning districts. And then the town board may reallow resubmission of a petition for the reclassification of property within the 1 year restricted period if it determines that since the date of the action on the prior petition, one of the following criteria have been met, and then there are the 4 criteria that are listed. So essentially, if someone were to withdraw an application, they would have a 1 year waiting period before that application could be resubmitted unless they met any of the 4 requirements that are enumerated here. And then we just further clarify that the petition is specifically for the reclassification of property in subsection 2. Sure.
I feel like I'm responsible for this one here being added. So when we went to this and said at any point in time up to decision, somebody can remove that. I didn't see any problem with that. I was just wondering out loud, well, the only disadvantage is somebody can count the votes. If I don't have the votes right now, so I'm going to pull this thing. And then I'm going to resubmit it, and they don't have to wait a year. So that's why this other language was added. It doesn't have, this could be taken out and just keep it the way it is, that, you know, it's only in the case that you are denied that you can't come back. But I just wanted to kind of set the tone as to why did this get added in there, which I'm not saying it is a problem. It's just one of the downsides if you just pull it out and wait for the opposition to die and then come back in again. So that's the nature of the discussion, and I feel like I'm the one who kind of started this discussion. So if you hate it, you can blame me and don't blame Lauren. She's just the messenger on that. So
No, so, okay, based on that, Jack, that's one reason I asked the question before. So 11.4.4 says I can withdraw it at any time, but this says if I withdraw it, go back to 11.8, the 11.8 with Lauren. But it says here, if I withdraw it, then, or denied it, well, forget everything else. If I withdraw it, shall not be resubmitted within 1 year.
right, there is consequences. So that's the point.
Yeah.
If you withdraw it, okay, that's fine, but there is a consequence, and the consequence is don't resubmit unless you meet those criteria in a year's time. That's
That's right, I get it. 11.8 is effects of denial of petition.
Any other questions? Okay.
On
Sure.
the date, what is the effective date if you withdraw for that 1 year to start tolling?
The date that you withdraw,
Okay, that's, see,
does that need to be clarified?
yeah, shall not be resubmitted within 1 year of the date of the town board's action. So I think there just needs to be some clarity there to what is the date of that it was withdrawn, or is it the date that was,
So
town board was gonna take action?
yeah, just for a point of clarification, as far as the withdrawn date, the way that it's written is because it could be that they want to withdraw it before it gets to town board action. So that would be the effective date of withdrawal. Same as, and we'll just go back. Same as, let's say that on the night that it was set for final action, to Frank's point, they decide at the meeting that night, they want to withdraw it. They say, I want to withdraw. That is the effective date of the withdrawal. And also, just to provide a little bit of further background on this, because I actually am the catalyst for most of these edits, including some of the edits in the other sections. The reason that we're suggesting to allow them to withdraw prior to final action by the town board is because what would be the point if someone no longer wanted to move forward with a project to require them to? It's their project, and if they no longer want to pursue that project, they should be able to withdraw. And so there have been instances where, let's say that maybe they want to withdraw, but we haven't even gotten to the public hearing, or we haven't even gotten to the final action night. There would be no reason to make them go through the motions and get permission from the town board to withdraw their application. And they can always withdraw at any time. That's no change. It's basically just clarifying that they don't have to get permission from the town board after they've gone through several steps to withdraw. And then secondly, the clarifications in C and D, again, the town board could always deny the petition. They don't have to move forward with the deferment if there are substantial changes or new public hearing if there are changes that result in an intensification, if they don't intend to actually approve the project. The point here is that they would not want to move forward and approve something when there had been substantial changes or an intensification without allowing the public to comment on it again and provide further input. So I just wanted to share that information as kind of the background as to why these edits were being proposed.
So this was a question I had for later, but I think it may apply. So I read or heard this week or last week that they've scrapped the plans for the hotel and apartments at Birkdale Village. Is that, and I think you were quoted in the article, so I'm sure you probably have the answer to that.
Yes, the developer has revised the plans, and there's indirect correlation to these changes, but these are things that, you know, staff is very comfortable with, for all the reasons Emily said.
I do want to say, the rezoning was modified, it wasn't withdrawn.
Correct.
So they're still going
That was my
forward-
question. They didn't
still
withdraw the
going forward
request. Okay.
with the rezoning, they just changed some of the pieces.
Correct. Right. No, they're still moving forward, and Monday night, the town board will be asked to make a determination if their changes were significant and continue down the path.
Additional questions?
Okay.
And are we just looking for a discussion on, this is a discussion day, or are you looking for a recommendation today?
If additional discussion is needed before recommendation, we understand, but it's requested for, we're not in a rush, essentially, if you need additional time. There's one more section, though, that I do need to, yeah. Yep, okay, section 4. So, and I'll give some background on this one. I actually had a project that had this question. So when a major subdivision sketch plan is submitted for review, during that review process, you're required to have a community meeting, and the community meeting, the subdivision ordinance indicates to whom the notification is required to be sent. And the proposed change is that the notification be provided to all the required recipients via certified mail. And this would essentially provide a mechanism to confirm if the mail was received by the correct parties. There are questions at times as to whether or not someone was sent mail or if they were sent to the appropriate people, and this would provide a mechanism to do that. And so that is why this proposed change is included.
Any questions on this part?
Yeah, and how often, I go to neighborhood meetings, I've been to almost every one, but it happens just about every time, doesn't it?
Yep, it's often that people are asked, usually, I'll say in the meetings that I've attended, the developer usually has their mailing list with them, and they can say, you know, like, I'm Ms. Jones, like, you know, did I receive, was it sent to me essentially? And they can look at the list and see if they were included on the mailing list. Now, every developer typically doesn't have confirmation that that mail was actually delivered, it wasn't like returned to the sender, but they will have the list of confirmed recipients with them.
All right, and just want to add on too.
Sure.
This is for the subdivision ordinance. We're also going to be adding this to the section that pertains to the rezonings as well. That those deliveries would need to be certified mail.
Any additional questions?
Those are all the sections of this text amendment, so.
Okay. Well, if the board does not want to discuss this any further, I guess we can open up the floor for a motion for recommendation.
Make your final motion, Finley.
I'll leave that to him. He's so eager right now. Go on, Tim. Close this out. Yes. You'll second.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the recommended petition for TA 23-2 regarding, well, that's it, right?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Motion passes.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to item 5A. We would like to recognize Tim Taylor, Thomas Finley, and Brandy Skelly. Hopefully, though, you will consider being reappointed for their service to the town, to the board, to the citizens of Huntersville. I know it's been a long time, 5 years with these two and 4 or 5 with you. And want to wish you all health, happiness, and best of luck in all of your future endeavors. And we'll miss you. Hopefully, you'll be back though. And we've got a couple of little mementos to remember your fun time on this board. No, the M&Ms were not enough. I'm sorry. So we've got a certificate for Mr. Finley.
Thank you.
We've got one for Mr. Taylor. We've got one for Ms. Skelly. There's also a little token here. So again, thank you guys for your service. We all appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, and with that, last item on the agenda is we need to elect a new chair and vice chair. So I will open the floor up for nominations for a chairperson.
Can we discuss the tenure left of everybody? Would that help with the decision?
Yeah, that'd probably, yeah,
Who's
yeah.
1 year left, who's 2 years left, who's 3 years left?
Yep,
For me, anyway, it may help.
yeah.
I make a nomination that Amy Hallman be elected the chair of the Ordinance Advisory Board.
And we have a second.
I'll second.
Okay, and that is seconded. And no discussion. I guess we can just go straight to a vote if there's no other nominations. All in favor? And you guys are abstaining?
I didn't think we could vote.
Yeah, you can vote. You can vote.
Oh,
Yeah, everybody can vote.
okay.
Okay. All in favor, that's unanimous. Congratulations.
Well,
Okay, and then next up is nominations for a vice chair, the vice chair role.
Hey, I did one. Come on, Jack.
I have a question for the board. Can I ask?
Yes, go right ahead.
What is the role of the vice chair other than filling in the absence of the chair? Is that pretty much it?
That is primarily it. It is specified in the bylaws, though.
I understand, and the term is for 1 year?
Yes. Yes, you can.
I make a motion that Kathy Jones be the vice chair.
Do we have a second? I'll second. That is seconded. All right, any discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor? Congratulations. All right, with that, do we have, we can adjourn, do we have a motion to adjourn? Make a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? All in favor? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.